Alright, in this video I'm going to give you my predictions for the 9709 Pure 3 Maths paper for February-March 2025. I've also created a full Cambridge style guest paper with a Cambridge style marking scheme, or if you hate marking schemes like I do, I've also created detailed solutions with explanations as well as a video of me solving the guest paper. But we'll talk more about that later in the video. For now, like the video, subscribe, and let's go through my predictions. We're going to go through this topic by topic and try to predict what types of questions could come. So starting off with algebra. As of 2024, algebra was the topic that carried the most marks in the Pure 3 paper. This is because it has quite a few subtopics in the modulus function, polynomial division, effect and remainder theorem, binomial expansion, and partial fractions. And apart from that, this is the foundational topic for Pure 3. So you see it cropping up in some of the more complex topics as well. So it probably has a larger effect. I would encourage you to spend quite a bit of time on this topic to make sure you understand it. Based on previous trends, I expect without a shadow of a doubt a partial fractions question to come. It has appeared in almost every Pure 3 paper in the last couple of years. Now this topic, algebra, usually comes with partial fractions and one of the other subtopics we mentioned above. As for which of these subtopics comes alongside of partial fractions, it's a toss-up really. As you see in my guest paper, I'm leaning more towards the modulus function, but there's no statistical reason for this, it's just my own intuition. Logarithms and exponentials only has two types of questions: your standard solve the logarithmic equation, and of course linear low, which is the question where you have to reduce an exponential relationship to a linear form and then solve for some values. Now the standard log equation shows up in almost every paper with about 3 or 4 marks, but I actually omitted this question in my guest paper. The reason is because the linear low question has showed up in every paper since June 2024. So there's clearly a trend here, and I get the feeling that it shows up in the February 2025 paper as well. And it's a concept that most students may not be familiar with, so it made sense for me to put this in the guest paper over your standard logarithmic equation question. Trig is a difficult one because it had a terrible 2024. It was completely omitted in some of the papers, and in the ones that it did show up in, it only had a few marks. But I do expect it to bounce back in the February 2025 paper. So I'm expecting to get a harmonic identity, that's the arc cos theta minus alpha question. So make sure to polish up on that. And trig is one of those topics that crops up in the more complex topics. For example, it will come up in differentiation, integration, numerical solutions, and even differential equations. So make sure you have a good understanding of trig. That's your double angle formulas, your compound angle formulas. You should be able to apply these in different scenarios. Differentiation is one of those topics I expect to come with a lot of marks in the Feb paper. It has 3 main types of questions. It's got the stationary point question, it's got the implicit differentiation question, as well as the parametric differentiation question. The stationary point question comes up in almost every paper, usually with about 6 marks, and more often than not, you're given a product of 2 trig functions and you have to find the x-coordinate of their stationary point. So you differentiate using the product rule, and this is one of those questions where you have to apply your knowledge of trig. Polish up on this question, it has a pretty good chance of showing up, and if and when it does, it will carry a lot of marks. Now you almost never see a paper that has both implicit differentiation and parametric differentiation. It's either or. Personally, in my guest paper, I've gone for parametric differentiation, but it really could be one of the two, so make sure you're prepared for both. Integration is the most essential topic in Pure 3. Yes, algebra usually carries more marks than integration, but integration tends to have more of an effect on the paper. I mean, there's literally a whole topic, differential equations, dedicated to applications of integration. So this is the one topic for Pure 3 that I would advise you prioritize in preparation for this February paper. It's got quite a bit of variety to it, and the challenge becomes that now you're integrating very complex functions, and each function seems to have a unique method of integration. But ultimately, the main methods will be integration by parts, integration by substitution, and integration by decomposition, where you start off by carrying out decomposition into partial fractions, then you integrate. Between by parts and substitution, one of the two usually come. Integration by parts is slightly more common, but in my guest paper I've gone for substitution purely because I have a hunch that in this paper we might get substitution over by parts, and I've gone for integration by decomposition as well, because when partial fractions come, they usually come with either a binomial expansion question or an integration question. I don't believe binomial expansion is coming in this paper, and so by elimination it must mean that we're getting integration by decomposition. Numerical solutions is one of the more predictable topics. It comes with a standard 3-part question where part A is you verifying the location of a root either by sketching or calculation. Part B is that whole converges question, and part C is the iterative formula. Master that question and you should be good to go for numerical solutions. Vectors on the other hand is a lot more difficult to predict because it has a lot of variety, but the questions that come up the most under vectors are your angle between two lines question and your parallel, intersect or skew lines question. And just to add to that, we haven't seen the foot of the perpendicular question in a while now, and it's one of those questions that could wreak havoc if it does come, so make sure to look into that as well. Differential equations is simply an application of integration, so if you work on your integration you should have no worries for this topic. I will say however, there is a rates of change DE that became sort of a trend in 2024. This is the slightly more challenging version of a standard DE, because given some rates of change information, you're supposed to formulate a DE and then solve that DE. And I know from AS no one likes rates of change, so work on that rates of change DE, because according to the trend it could come up again in the February paper. Finally, we have the complex numbers topic. This is a topic at the beginning of 2024 I felt was a bit underexplored by Cambridge, but as the year progressed we started seeing them explore some of these more obscure concepts like your Euler form, your polar form, and even the 2 square roots question, which is arguably the rarest question in pure 3, and it appeared twice in the same year for that matter. I think in 2025 they will continue to explore more and more of this topic, so I'd suggest you give a lot of attention to this complex numbers topic, and I do think it probably comes with quite a lot of marks in this February paper, so be ready for that. I don't think the 2 square roots question appears though, but I do have it in my guest paper because it's a very rare question. There are very few of these questions that you can practice with, so I felt like it would be good practice for those people who do the guest paper as well. The argon diagram is a staple. I'm confident that this comes up in the February paper. Apart from that, you might get a bit of Euler form and polar form, but just make sure to go through this topic again because there are a lot of unique concepts that Cambridge can test from this topic. Alright, so to summarize everything, here's a list of the questions I think you should prioritize because they have a good chance of coming up in the February 2025 Pure 3 paper. Partial fractions, linear law, harmonic identities, stationary points, parametric differentiation, integration by substitution, integration by parts, textbook numerical solutions, scalar product applications, parallel, intersect or skew lines, rates of change DE, argon diagrams, and the 2 square roots question. Now, using a lot of the ideas and predictions I have discussed in this video, I created a guest paper. It has a lot of similarities with the actual paper that you will write in February. I've made it in such a way as to make it feel like the actual exam paper, and it has that Cambridge feeling. The questions themselves look like Cambridge questions. The idea is for it to be the exam before the exam, to give those who use the guest papers an unfair advantage going into the exams. And apart from the full Cambridge style guest paper, I've also created a full Cambridge style marking scheme for those who want to really mark their guest papers accurately as Cambridge would, to get an accurate representation of how they could perform in the final exam. However, I do appreciate that not everyone understands or even wants to use a marking scheme. They just want to know if their answer is correct, and if not, where they went wrong. So I've also created a worksheet with detailed solutions for all the questions in the guest paper, and you also get a full video solution of me solving all the questions in the guest paper. So if you're ready to collect that A-star that I am handing to you on a silver platter, feel free to purchase the guest papers on my website. That will be the first link in the description. And if you want to see a sample of what the guest papers look like, you can see the October-November 2024 guest papers I created listed for free on my website. For schools interested in guest papers, you can fill out the respective form on my website. The link to that is also in the description. That's it for this video. Like the video, subscribe, and see you next week for more guest papers.